Hello, this webinar is a part of the U.S. Constitutional System series, and its title is Resisting the Accumulation of Power. We're going to discuss some revolutionary ideas that will hopefully revive your mind. Less than 1% of Americans have ever been taught what you're about to learn. It's not been taught for over 100 years, but they were the key ideas behind the Revolutionary War and the American constitutional system. They will sound revolutionary when you hear them. They'll be revolutionary and sound radical even because they're so outside the norm. They'll be revolutionary exciting because there's great clarity added on how a people can regain freedom and liberty by understanding these principles. Now let's take a look at the resisting of the accumulation of power and why this is so important to the American constitutional system. Well, let's get a definition out of the way, the word usurpation. This is a commonly used word during the Revolutionary and Founding period and has even occurred in the Declaration of Independence. Usurpation is a wrongful seizure or exercise of authority or privilege belonging to another, an encroachment. Usurpation of power, the founders believed, equaled tyranny. James Madison made this particularly clear in this quote: "The accumulation, that is, the usurpation or accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether it's hereditary, self-appointed, or elected, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny." Now at this point you might be saying, well gosh, I didn't consider the accumulation of powers as being tyranny. I mean, what about this chopping off of heads and the gallows? And isn't that really tyranny? Well, for the sake of this webinar, let's call that hard tyranny. What the founders were most alarmed by and called equal in its scope tyranny was this soft tyranny, or the usurpation or accumulation of powers. The world and the media and academics would have us believe that there's only one kind of tyranny, and it's this hard tyranny, and we ignore the soft tyranny to our peril. But we need to pay attention to the soft tyranny, this quiet, stealth accumulation of powers, even if it's done under patriotic terms and conditions. The founders would have us focus on this because this can be done by stealth, and it can be hidden from view and sometimes hard to detect. But if the soft tyranny, the usurpation of powers, is not stopped, the founders knew that it would lead to hard tyranny. To emphasize how and why the founders believed this, let's turn to the Declaration itself. The Declaration of Independence lists 18 grievances. It could be mainly defined as a listing of soft tyranny or usurpation of power. In the introduction of this grievance list, and at the close of this list, it's stated that every item on the list is an act of tyranny. This is how the list is introduced in the middle of the Declaration. The history of this present king of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. So they're basically saying everything on this list that we're about to put in the Declaration are acts of tyranny. And here's a summary of just 10 of those items. The king was overruling legitimate laws, selectively not enforcing laws, arbitrarily making laws by decree, suspending laws that he did not like, passing laws in secret, passing laws at unusual times and places, approving judges with the design to overrule laws, using public money to pay off officials, impose taxes without consent, and taking away the power of self-government from the people. This list was true in 1776, and many people feel it's true today. But on this list, there's no hangings, there's no chopping off of heads, and at the conclusion of this list in the Declaration, it says this: "A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people." So every act on this list on the Declaration of Independence they defined as tyranny, and most of that list would be defined as soft tyranny. So the usurpation of power equals tyranny. Well, how is the American constitutional system designed to stop this usurpation of power? Well, in the American constitutional system, when a leader or group of leaders begin to expand their powers beyond those enumerated in the national constitution, they begin to accumulate powers from the states. Well, the American constitutional system was designed that the state government would be a check on national government and would resist this expansion of power. If the states were exhibiting this behavior, The county and local governments would be a check on state power and federal power if need be. And then lastly, the people themselves, the self-governing individuals and citizens and family government, would resist this usurpation or accumulation of power beyond the delegated limits that are enumerated in the state constitutions or in the federal constitution. Well, the founders were so serious about resisting this accumulation of powers, Benjamin Franklin even suggested this motto for the national seal: resistance to tyrants is obedience to God. Well, where did the founders get these principles? The principle of the lower magistrate, that is civil ruler, and its duty to resist the higher magistrate or civil ruler in regards to the usurpation of power and or the people's rights. Well, it came out of the Reformation of the 15 and 1600s, and these individuals we'll take a brief look at now. The doctrine of the lower magistrate and their duty to resist tyranny is a Reformation theological social theory. Martin Luther and John Calvin developed the idea of the intervening lesser magistrate who resists impositions of tyranny from above. They in turn had those ideas picked up by John Knox of Scotland, who taught it and preached it and trained his congregation members in these ideas. John Locke in his treatise of government picked up these ideas, and they all developed the principles and concepts that were eventually articulated in the Declaration and designed to be safeguarded in the American constitutional system. So the Reformation was a restoration of biblical thinking, and so this idea is a biblical concept in which a lower civil ruler acts on behalf of the people in his governing capacity to resist and protect their civil liberty from being usurped by a higher civil ruler. This is a check on the usurpation of power, and it's the essence of tyranny. And they got this out of a detailed study of a biblical book called the Book of Romans, chapter 13. However, if the lower civil ruler does not fulfill his duty and stand up to protect the people from the higher civil ruler's usurpation, then the people's frustration and anger only builds and can become intense, and the likelihood of citizens' action, protest, and eventually revolution grows as the people will fight for their rights directly. When the lower civil ruler resists the higher civil ruler in this context, he's fulfilling his proper duty. This is a great protection for the people and for society, because it keeps the citizens' anger in check because their civil ruler is acting on their behalf to protect their God-given rights. Now, how did the founding period articulate these principles? I'd like to take a look at two articulations of this concept. First, the Virginia Resolutions of 1798 and the concept of interposition, and the Kentucky Resolutions of that same year and the concept of nullification. So the doctrine of interposition, that is the resisting of unconstitutional laws, was articulated in the Virginia Resolution, and James Madison, its author, said states are duty-bound to interpose for arresting the progress of the evil. Now, he's the chief architect of the national Constitution, and yet he's writing this concept in the Virginia Resolutions. This means that not only a state has a right, but a duty to prevent harm caused by unconstitutional laws. That is, state legislatures, state governors, state supreme courts, all are called to stand up against the expansion of federal or national power. Now, the second example is in the Kentucky Resolutions, where Thomas Jefferson had a hand in writing this: whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. When the federal government exercises a power it does not have a right to exercise, it is unconstitutional, and the states have the right and duty to declare that it is unconstitutional. The Kentucky Resolutions appealed explicitly to the 10th Amendment that says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So to summarize this concept, the doctrine of nullification is a state's declaration that a federal law exceeds constitutional powers and is thereby considered null and void within that state. Now, these were not without controversy at the time. Those that wanted a strong and powerful national government did not like these ideas even then, and they're not taught or discussed now. But to not even know about these concepts is to surrender a key freedom concept on how the American constitutional system was designed to operate. So what would it look like today if this doctrine of the lower magistrates resisting higher magistrates' accumulation of power were to be put into practice? Well, we'd be rolling back the usurpation of power from self-government of the family and pushing it back and taking back our ability to govern ourselves. We'd be at a county level resisting overreach of power and accumulation of power by the state, and at the state level we'd be resisting the encroachment and the accumulation of power by the federal and national government, and we'd be returning to the American constitutional system. You need to also check out modern examples of these concepts being put into practice by states and local governments, and there's webinars on these topics at uscivicstraining.org. My name's Craig Seibert. Thanks for listening.